The Lost Years, a tale of injustice and redemption. In the dimly lit courtroom, a hush fell over the crowd as the judge prepared to deliver the ruling. At the center of it all stood John Bunn, a man who had spent the majority of his life battling a truth too many were unwilling to hear. He was innocent. It began on an unremarkable day in Brooklyn, New York, in 1991. John was just 14 years old, a boy on the cusp of adolescence, dreaming of a future far from the city's chaos. Those dreams were shattered when NYPD Detective Louis Scarcella knocked on his door. With no warning, no explanation, John was arrested and thrust into the unforgiving machinery of the criminal justice. He was accused of a murder he didn't commit. There was no evidence, no probable cause, just the word of a detective known for his questionable tactics. But in the 1990s, the system rarely hesitated. The word of an officer carried weight, and John's protests of innocence were drowned out by the momentum of an unjust process. At 14, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to spend the 16 years passed in a cell. The world outside evolving while John's remained frozen in time. Each day was a battle against despair, but he clung to his innocence, refusing to let the walls define him. Released on parole after serving over a decade and a half, his fight was far from over. For another 11 years, he lived under the shadow of his conviction, working tirelessly to clear his name. The tide began to turn when allegations of misconduct surfaced against Detective Scarcella. John's case was reopened. The evidence or lack thereof was re-examined. And then came the revelation: the arrest should never have happened. The case against him crumbled. Finally, after 27 years of relentless struggle, the conviction was overturned. For those who remember a different America, a country grappling with its flaws, but striving for justice, John's story is a stark reminder. It is a story not just of wrongful conviction, but of resilience, of humanity surviving against insurmountable odds. It is a call to reflect, to question, and to ensure that no child is ever condemned to such a fate. As John walked out of the courtroom that day, a free man, the weight of nearly 3 decades lifted from his shoulders. Yet in his eyes, there remained a quiet sadness, a recognition of the years he could never reclaim. For John, freedom was not just about leaving the prison walls, it was about reclaiming his place in the thin line of truth, David Ronta's fight for freedom. On a spring day in 2013, David Ronta walked into a Brooklyn courtroom for what should have been an ordinary legal proceeding. But this day was far from ordinary. After spending 22 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, David was about to hear the words that would redefine his life. The conviction is vacated. In 1990, David Ronta's life took a turn no one could have foreseen. He was a family man living a modest life when NYPD Detective Louis Scarcella identified him as a suspect in a high-profile murder case. The victim was a beloved rabbi, shot in cold blood during a botched robbery. The crime shocked Brooklyn, and Scarcella delivered a suspect, David Ronta. A police lineup was arranged, but there was no evidence linking him to the crime, no fingerprints, no weapon, no eyewitness placing him at the scene. Yet, Ronta was identified as the shooter. Decades later, the truth would emerge. SCA. What followed was a trial where fabricated evidence and coerced testimony stacked the odds against Ronta. The jury was convinced. The judge handed down a sentence of 37.5 years to life. And just like that, David Ronta, an innocent man, was cast into the cold confines. For 22 years, David endured the grueling monotony and quiet despair of life behind bars. His family drifted away. His youth slipped through his fingers. And the world he had known became unrecognizable. But Ronta never gave up. He maintained his innocence, waiting for anyone to take the. In a moment both triumphant and bittersweet, David Ronta stood before the judge. His belongings, what little he owned, were slung over his back. The judge's voice broke the silence. "To say I'm sorry for what you endured would be an understatement. Th. But freedom came at a cost. The life he left behind could never be reclaimed. The years stolen from him. The birthdays missed. The time with loved ones, all were lost to an injustice that should never have OC. David Ronta's case is a stark reminder of the fallibility of the justice system and the price of rushing to judgment. It is a story of endurance, of a man who survived against all odds, and of a system that failed him in its purr. The city of New York eventually awarded Ronta over $8 million in compensation, a small measure of justice for the decades he spent behind bars. But no settlement could truly repay the time lost or the scars left by Th. As David stepped outside the courthouse, the sun on his face for the first time as a free man, his expression was one of quiet triumph. He carried not just the weight of his own story, but the hope that his ordeal might spark. For those who lived through the seismic changes of the late 20th century, Ronta's story is a somber echo of a time when expediency overshadowed justice. It is a reminder that the fight for truth is never truly over, and that every life, no matter how small it may seem in the grand scheme, A happy meal denied. The tragedy and triumph of Susan Mellon. It was an ordinary day in Los Angeles when Susan Mellon decided to treat her 9-year-old daughter to a happy meal. As the mother and child sat in the parking lot of a McDonald's, savoring a rare moment of joy, everything changed. Police cars swarmed, officers emerged, and Susan found herself in handcuffs. She would not hold her daughter again. In 1997, Susan was accused of murdering her ex-boyfriend, a crime she adamantly denied. The evidence against her? A single informant, a woman later revealed to be a pathological liar, who claimed Susan had confessed to the killing. There was no physical evidence, no reliable witnesses, no motive. But the justice system moved swiftly, painting Susan as a cold-blooded key. Her trial was brief. The jury convicted her, and the judge handed down a sentence of life without parole. Susan, a mother of 3, was labeled a murderer and cast into the unforgiving world of a maximum security prison. For her children, it was as if their mother. Inside, Susan clung to hope. She wrote letters, pleading with lawyers and organizations to take another look at her case. Her resolve was fueled by her love for her children and the memory of that last moment at McDonald's, a meal interrupted. A family torn APA. Years passed. The world outside moved on. But Susan's life was frozen in time. Then, in 2014, a breakthrough came. The California Innocence Project 2. In the same courtroom where she was sentenced to die in prison, Susan stood once more, awaiting the judge's decision. This time, the outcome was different. The judge's words rang out clearly. The judgment is vacated. The conviction is overturned. The case is dismissed. Freedom, however, came with a bittersweet edge. Susan's children had grown up without her. 17 years of birthdays, school plays, and graduations had passed without her presence. The state of California awarded her $597,000 in compensation, and the city of Los Angeles settled her lawsuit for $12 million. But no amount of money could ever replace the lost time. For Susan, the journey from conviction to exoneration is a testament to resilience and the enduring strength of a mother's love. Her story is a sobering reminder of how fragile justice can be. How easily. As Susan reflects on her lost years, she remains steadfast in her mission to raise awareness about wrongful convictions and the flaws in the justice system. Her story speaks to the heart of anyone who has ever doubted the system's infallibility and serves as a powerful call to ensure such tragedies are naive. For those who remember the ideals of justice, fairness, and accountability that once defined the American dream, Susan Mellon's story is a reminder of the work still to be done. It is a story of loss, perseverance,